problem we have with our text today, there's always a problem with the text, but the problem we have particularly today is there would be a really wonderful way as Americans first and Christians second to read this text. And that would be to just take it out of the context of the rest of the Gospel of Matthew, out of the context of the rest of all of the Gospels, out of the context of the rest of the Bible altogether, and just decide that what we have is a wonderfully patriotic American Jesus who is saying to us, we can be Christians now and worship, and then we can go out into the world and just do what the world says we should do. And that's fine, because some things belong to God, and some things belong to Caesar, in our case, we could say society or, our nation. And that's the way this text is used a lot of times, to talk about the separation of church and state, to talk about how it's okay for Christians to engage in questionable business practices because it's the American way, to talk about how even though we follow a God who tells us one thing, it's okay to act in the world as if we follow a different type of God. An American Jesus would be very convenient. An American Jesus would encourage us in our American ideal of individualism, right? Of being able to earn our own way, of working hard and the result of our labors being our own. But this is not the Jesus that we have. And certainly, Jesus was not American because a little before his time, or he was a little before our time. What we have is a divine Jesus. What we have is God incarnate coming and talking to us and trying to tell us something that we haven't gotten yet, even though we've heard it many times before in our story, in the scriptures. What we have is a Jesus who tells us that everything belongs to God. When Jesus asks, whose head is this and whose title on the coin that they show him, they tell him, well, it's the emperor's head and title. But Jesus doesn't actually tell them that they're right then, that the coin belongs to the emperor. That head and that title are the emperor's, sure. But what is that coin? It's made of what? Metal, right? Where did that come from? Did the emperor make that? Does that belong to the emperor? Did the emperor somehow figure out a way to himself be a god and make his own creation, and therefore that coin is from the emperor? No. But he's claimed it as his own with his name and his title, or his face and his title on it. So this text, unfortunately, becomes rather convicting. Because how often in our lives, answer all the time, do we do the same thing, right? That we claim as our own things that we can't actually be owners of. Or that we claim as our own things that we are legally owners of, but in fact are just gifts from God, or parts of God's creation that we have been made stewards of, but not owners. If we think about these two different ways to understand this story, to understand what Jesus is saying here, we can see two very divergent paths in the way it leads us into our lives outside of Sunday morning. If we understand ourselves as humans as owners of stuff, then our money, like that coin in the story, is ours to do with as we please. And paying taxes like they ask in the story, or giving offering on a Sunday morning, or pledging to NPR as they've been asking me to do all week, or giving to relief for whatever of the thousands of good causes there are out there. These acts of giving our money are a nuisance, aren't they? It's our money. We worked, we earned it, it's ours. And when people start asking us for our money, well, that's kind of annoying. And when we actually give it, they should be very grateful. Because I worked hard for that, and now I'm giving it to you, and you didn't do anything for it. So it sets up this really awkward power imbalance. If we humans understand ourselves as the owners of stuff, or even as the owners of our own lives, then our bodies are ours to do with as we please. And the bodies of others, whom we have power over, are ours to do with as we please. Our history as a nation plays that one out pretty horrifically with slavery, justified by the Christian tradition. Our current culture, which some would say is a sort of rape culture, plays that out pretty horrifically. When violence against women is always talked about as violence against women, and not talked about as men perpetrating violence, we see this way in which not understanding who owns these bodies can result in a lot of abuse. When police brutality becomes about black folks and other minority folks just not acting properly, not doing with their own bodies what they should be doing in those situations, and it doesn't get talked about as people with social and legal power abusing that power, not doing with their bodies what they should be doing in those situations, we see the problem of believing that we own things. When our environment is used and abused, purchased and sold, and it doesn't matter as long as in the moment we're comfortable now and we made a profit. We see this result of not understanding who actually owns things. But if we approach our lives and our world and our society with an understanding that ultimately God owns everything, God created everything, then suddenly everything changes. We see the environment not as something we can use, but as God's beloved creation that God said was good. We see ourselves and our fellow human beings not as things that we can use and, advantage or disadvantage or power that we can take or earn, but as God's beloved creation. The way we view our resources as the results not of our hard work, not of our ability, but our resources are a result of God's beloved creation. All that we have and all that we are is God's. So let's ask ourselves the question that Jesus asks his questioners about that coin. Whose face is on us? Whose title? Well, if we go back to the beginning, which is apparently a very good place to start. In creation, God made all things to God's design. And God declared all of those things to be good. In creation, God made us humans in God's image. With God's image in us and on us. Whatever stamps the world might impress on those elements, they are temporary and they are surface. Deep down inside each of us and everything in creation has a mark, has an image that cannot be removed. In baptism, we are even more clearly marked, and we are given a title. In baptism, we are marked with the cross of Christ. You can't see it anymore, but it's on your forehead. And it will never, ever be worn away. And in baptism, you are given a title, Child of God. It may not be written across your face. That'd be weird, but it's a title that you can never lose. The images and the titles of our world, pressed on coins or wherever, get worn away. Old coins turn into just little circles of metal after a while, as the print wears down. And then it's easier to see, isn't it? What it really is. It's part of God's creation. Sometimes we get a little worn down. Sometimes our facade gets rubbed away. Sometimes it's harder for us to keep those labels on that society would have us wear. And then it's a little bit easier to see that image of God in each and every one of us that will never wear away, that will never get washed off, that will never be untrue. When Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, he is not giving an easy answer. And he is not giving the answer that we want. He's reminding all of us that when it comes down to it, very little belongs to Caesar. And a whole lot, indeed everything, belongs to God.